Like with any safety rope out there or any timing chain for you car buffs out there, if one little piece or a link is, well, if it becomes weak or missing, if I say a missing link, if I may use that terminology, the whole system can become flawed and may not even function as fully intended. Well, such as like the Babylonian calendar. Believe it or not, especially since 499 BC or BCE, if you prefer that, due to 7 Babylonian month names that were inspired by the Most High into the Tanakh, as we say, Old Testament, aka. As I explained in part 1 of this playlist video series, to know when biblical years should begin. The simple purpose of this video is to help exterminate or terminate. And that doesn't mean I'm an exterminator or terminator, but to simply eliminate incorrect assumptions and conclusions among Torah observant believers that the ancient Babylonian zodiac and the Babylonian calendar were the same, especially after 499 BC or BCE, if you prefer that. And so with that being said, let's dive right into my Google slide as I will begin sharing again. As I've titled Babylonian Calendar Missing Connection, Part 2, and subtitled Babylonian Zodiac versus Babylonian Calendar. Did you know that the Babylonian Zodiac and the common public calendar of the ancient Babylonians down through the Persians were very different, especially from 499 BCE to about 75 AD or CE, when the Babylonian astronomers simply stopped recording their eclipse dating onto clay tablets that have been preserved and readable thousands of years later. Well, is that a coincidence? Regardless, the big differences, this is what we want to look at regarding the beginning of each year, the zodiac, constellation signs versus the months. And we're talking about the differences also in astrology, predicting the future, versus actual calendar month names and timing for the dating and for feasting. And Babylonians had different feasts than the Israel. I'm not proposing those are the same or parallel. But the differences in a solar years of the 12 equal duration star constellation signs versus lunar solar or solar lunar calendar of the Babylonians. Years with 12 or 13 months having 29 or 30 days each, according to the visible sighting of the moon, of course, in the cycles of the moon, the Babylonian calendar. And so we're talking about names of signs, 12 signs versus names of 12 to 13 months every year. As an example of emphasis, both the Babylonians and the Greeks similarly looked to 12 star constellations to divide each solar year into 12 equal time periods of each year, aka 12 months. You can look at them as months, some do, as I used to, but they're actually signs and star constellation time periods. They are most commonly known as the zodiac, with different star constellation names used by the Greeks. As with the Greek Roman Gregorian calendar today, the 12 zodiac signs or time periods each overlap 2 consecutive Gregorian months, as the modern horoscope constellation Leo overlaps July and August. And the only reason I know that is because people say, oh, Russ, based on your birthday, you're a Leo. Well, okay. Not a big deal to me, but we know that who the Lion of Judah is, Yehuda. There's a coincidences. We got to be careful not to take them too far. But in other words, none of the zodiac sign time periods begin and end with any Gregorian months, as I think we all know. Well, such was similar with the ancient Babylonian calendar, the public calendar of the Babylonians and the Persians for that matter, because they didn't change the calendar system or the names once they took over the Babylonians and conquered. Well, in that because the Babylonian zodiac signs were not based upon the cycles of the moon to begin each zodiac sign time period, aka month, if you want to look at it that way. But surely since 499 BC, each Babylonian zodiac sign overlapped two different Babylonian calendar consecutive month names as well, just like it does with the Gregorian calendar today. Explicitly since 499. The best scholarly evidence citation I have to expose the important relevant details of the ancient Babylonian calendar will be exposed in part 4 of this video series. It was going to be a part 3, but now working on part 2 here, I realized I got to split things off into a part 3 and then a part 4. Well, here in this video, I do offer just one easy to find online if you want to check up on me on this. Non-biased, relevant example of ancient Babylonian zodiac versus their calendar. Has ancient astronomy information exposing the big differences in the Babylonian zodiac versus the Babylonian calendar. And what we'll be looking at is the Sky and Telescope magazine, January 2018, where they have an article on ancient astronomy. Here's the front page of the magazine, and jumping into page 66, first page of this article, titled The Ancient Circle of Animals. And notice my annotation here. It says, the path of the sun through the stars, known as the ecliptic, passes through 12 ancient constellations. The Greeks called them the circle of animals. In ancient Greek, Kleikos Zodiacos, now shortened to zodiac. Jumping down to the next paragraph, the Greeks inherited the 12 constellations of the zodiac as well as the concept of the zodiac as a singular object, like a wheel, as we're dividing it into 12. They adopted it from the Babylonians. Jumping over to the next side of the page, as I've underlined here, blue being Babylonians, red being Greeks. Through it was indeed the Babylonians who conceived of the 12 ancient constellations in the path of the sun as a unit, which the Greeks then called them the zodiac. They did so only as late as the 5th century under the influence of the Persian sun worship. And that's what they're saying here, that the Babylonians did a change and it became solar in the 5th century, where it was a lunar before that. As we'll see here as we go to page 67 from the same Sky and Telescope magazine, January 2018. Notice here, the Sumero-Babylonian New Year began with the first visible crescent, evening crescent moon following the vernal equinox. So they would never begin their years after 499, as I'll provide more information regarding the timing of that based on the clay tablets in part 4 of this video series, is they would begin their years with the first crescent moon on or after the vernal equinox. And so the month names appear on Sumerian clay tablets written before 3000 BCE or BC. But most of the Sumerian month names known to us relate to religious festivals that took place during those months. As I highlight in red here, none refer explicitly to any constellation on the ecliptic. So notice this is the Babylonian calendar. It's different from their zodiac. And in the ancient times, it was a lunar zodiac. But notice there's no Nisan in here. As I continue down here in red, the oldest complete surviving astronomical work is referring to the constellation of the Plough, found in archaeology in the mid-19th century in the ruins of the place at Nineveh. You know the story of Jonah, Nineveh, of the Assyrian king during that time period of 668 to 627 BC. But evidence suggests that the text itself was actually composed before 1000 BC. So continuing on here, the Babylonian, Persian, Egyptian, and Greek star constellation signs and names changed, and they evolved over the centuries. If you look into this, and or if you don't know already, some of you do, watching and listening to this. It's an example, just giving you one example here. The Babylonian plow became the Greek Roman Aries, a ram. Went from a plow to a ram. The same timing, though, of Passover in the spring. I'm going to blow this up so you can see it better in my video. So this is page 71 of the same Star and Telescope magazine, January 2018. Notice here under the subject title, the origin of the ram. This is the Aries. This is the Greek Aries, which as I've underlined there as the plowmen, because the Mesopotamians, the plow was pulled by the bull. So there's a bull, and later became a bull. Notice how I highlighted in green here, ear of grain for the spica directly in front of the bull. Here showing the springtime and the barley and the harvests of that time period. But all this doesn't explain why the Greeks had a ram in the stretch of the zodiac, where the Mesopotamians earlier had a plowman. And over on the next slide, I just kind of interesting to note there that the Mesopotamians constellations were probably known in Egypt long before this, not necessarily relating to this video series here, but moving on here. Here's taking a look at Aries here. See stars there. A plow, you can see a plow hook maybe, as the Babylonians did, and the Greeks see it. Somehow they use their imagination to come up with a ram. And that's beyond my imagination how they do that with just stars and come up with a lot of conclusions there that I don't have much interest in. But it is interesting to also note that the Babylonian zodiac was originally lunar, as I mentioned earlier from that article on page 67, I believe, with, as you'll find out if you looked into it further from other articles online, you can see that there were 17 or 18 star constellation signs when it was lunar, and eventually became purely solar with only 12 star constellation signs since 499 BC. That's the 5th century BC. In regard to zodiac history and function, again, let me just confess that's not my expertise. That's not much of my interest. There's others out there that you can, if you have interest in that, I haven't felt inspired to do so. But let me continue on with this regardless. This Sky and Telescope magazine article does not intend to involve in detail the change since 499 BCE in the Babylonian calendar system or the monthly names. There's no mention of the monthly names of the Babylonian calendar to become, which it became since then a solar lunar calendar. Sometimes a 13th month based upon the beginning of each year after the solar vernal, that's the spring equinox. Due to being so independent from the ancient astronomical zodiac star constellation signs, as this article in the magazine targets. That's the purpose of it, and that's what I'm using it for, just to show how different they are in names and everything I've mentioned earlier at the introduction and the beginning of this video teaching. But as a reminder, the specific purpose of this video is to expose the big differences between the Babylonian zodiac versus the Babylonian calendar systems since 499 specifically. So let's take a quick, brief look at the 12 Babylonian zodiac constellation signs for further emphasis. As you can see at the top of this wheel, the month number 7 is I've circled in blue, and I did an accidentally one right in the center of the bullseye. I didn't intend that, and then it's going to take too much time to correct that. But notice there's no Tishri in the 7th month. And Leo here is like in the 8th time period, but no Tishri. And scrolling down to the 1st month, as I've circled in light green, there's no Nisan. Just to emphasize, it is a difference in the Babylonian calendar versus what they were using for the zodiac. What's known as the zodiac, as the Greeks named it. I mean, it's commonly known today. So as a result, the 12 constellation signs of the Babylonian to the Greek zodiac do not have appointed timing importance in application to our Creator's great biblical calendar system for every annual moed. That's a holy feast day. And maybe they'll line up sometimes. Many speculate that the timing of the birth of Yeshua, there was a special constellation up there, or was it an angelic star that led those magi, the wise men? That's not my expertise. Again, I'm not trying to get into that. Don't want to go off onto that deer trail, but simply sometimes they might line up is all I'm saying here in this video teaching, and some use it for predicting the future, that these star constellations will line up according to Bible prophecies. Again, that's not what I get into or my interest. I don't feel inspired to know a whole lot about that. I just want to really obey him, because I know that if we're worthy, we will escape these things to come. If we're watching and we're praying always, and love, of course, is more important than knowledge and information. We do want to have love, the way he defines it, not the way humans tend to define it sometimes, based upon his commandments, and his Torah teaches how to love him and how to love each other. I think we all know that, if you're listening to this much so far and made it this far with me in the video. Don't want to preach to the choir too much, but it is imperative to see that the Babylonian month names explicitly written in the Tanakh, that's the Old Testament text, since 499, do not offer the same monthly timing as the 12 zodiac signs. So don't use the zodiac to try to determine the 1st month or the 7th month or Shavuot, Pentecost, and all these holy days, these annual ones. But rather, the 7 Babylonian month names written in the Tanakh lead us in these end times, especially, to find concrete, or clay tablet, if I may put it that way, of supportive evidence to conclude that it was the Babylonians who slightly changed and improved their calendar system, more likely influenced by the Hebrews, or Jews, if you want to put it that way, in Persia, such as Daniel onward. Not the other way around, surely, as many wrongly assume and conclude without enough evidence or proof. The best evidence for this is provided in parts 1 and 4 of this video playlist series, as I've got it outlined so far. Not sure if I'll have more parts in this or not as I go. Sometimes I split things off, as I've done recently. But as a reminder, as inspired to be written in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 13, verse 30, he wrote, "Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and Levites, to each in his service," including what he wrote in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan," not Aviv. He could have written it Aviv if it had to be a certain state of barley, but what stage is it in? That's where oral law comes into play for those who like to go by barley, the barley believers, as I also refer to them as I used to be. Never in the Tanakh, of course, since 499. It was never Aviv. You won't find that word as far as I know. You do see Nisan in the dating of the Tanakh. Again, as many of us today utilize Friday night after sundown and Saturday until sunset for the 7th day within each Gregorian calendar. We use those Gregorian names, such as the only reason why I propose is because the same timing and consistency to avoid terminology confusion within modern dominant cultures that we have to live in. Likewise, religious Judaism started utilizing Babylonian month names from 499 onward because of the month and year, the beginning of each month and year. It was based upon the same principles regarding the biblical calendar months of 1 through 12, and sometimes a 13th month also. Unfortunately, this is where I'm going to step on some big toes here. May He protect me from persecution according to His will. Nevertheless, unfortunately, the modern purely mathematical calculated Orthodox Jewish calendar does not rely on visible crescent new moons anymore. About 80% of the time. I'm not going to get into why 20% of the time they're correct, but it really gets into postponement rules that they've added centuries after the destruction of the Second Temple. Over the last 1,200 years, there's been some postponement rules added, 12 to 1,500 years. As not found in the Mishnah. Of course, they weren't in the Mishnah. I can prove that. But again, I don't want to go off on a deer trail here. And neither does the modern Orthodox calendar, the Jewish calendar, rely on the vernal spring equinox to occur on or before Nisan 1 every year. Again, not anymore. It used to, especially during the time of the Second Temple, while it was still standing. Neither does the modern Karaite Jewish calendar in regard to the barley versus the vernal spring equinox requirements needed to begin each year. Now, such introduces another subtopic, and that I will save for part 3 in this playlist video series. Even though the Karaite Jewish calendar is more similar to 2,000 years ago, there are some differences, and I'll expose that as well. Therefore, I should include this video now is titled Creator's Calendar Missing Connection Part 2 to clearly emphasize such factual information in Part 3. To be subtitled Modern Judaism Calendars, that's plural because of the Karaites, versus the Tanakh Babylonian calendar, because the month names are written in the Tanakh. To look at the differences there. So, at your convenience, please watch parts 3 and 4 coming soon, and part 1 if not already. And if they're not all uploaded already, stay tuned. In the meantime, Baruch Hashem and Shalom Aleichem.